Let's not pretend this is an archaeological tour. This is an autopsy. And you're not a tourist. You're a witness to a crime scene that's been cold for 2,000 years. So forget history. Start with the stench, the bile and sweat cocktail of stale terror that clings to these stone walls. This isn't the air of a bygone era. It's the preserved atmosphere of a human meat market. The Lupanar of Pompeii wasn't a building. It was a machine for grinding human souls into dust, and its gears were greased with the tears of children sold into slavery. Look at the walls. That isn't art. It's a goddamn butcher's diagram, a numbered menu of degradation. You want number 4? Number 9? Your coin buys you the right to inflict a specific, illustrated horror upon a living, breathing person who has been legally reclassified as an object. This is the rotten, pulsating heart of the Roman Empire they never wanted you to see. A cramped, windowless cell where the only light is the dying spark in a slave's eyes. The stone bed is not for rest. It is an altar for a sacrifice. The graffiti isn't a historical curiosity. It is the exultant signature of a predator, a victory cry scrawled in charcoal over the corpse of a human spirit. "I was here," it screams. "I conquered. I destroyed." This place wasn't an outlier of Roman society. It was the sacrament. It was the temple where the city's powerful men went to worship their one true God. Absolute, corrupting, remorseless power. And the historians, the academics, they are not guides. They are ghouls, picking through the bones and calling it scholarship. They are the architects of the great lie, the pathetic cowards who label this systematic torture a complex social institution. They have taken an abomination, a monument to human cruelty, and gift-wrapped it for you as culture. They are accomplices, sanitizing a holocaust of the soul because they lack the spine to stare into the abyss and call the monster by its name. They have fed you a sterile, palatable fairy tale to protect you from a single, terrifying truth. That truth is that the brothel wasn't just a symptom of a diseased society. It was the blueprint. It was the testing ground for a philosophy of power so absolute, so devoid of empathy, that it would define the next 2 millennia of human history. The rot didn't stop at the brothel's door. It was designed to spread. So what was the ultimate purpose of this perfectly engineered engine of filth? What were they truly building in this laboratory of despair? The answer will not just sicken you, it will indict us all. So who fed this machine? Who were the architects of this industrial-scale degradation? Don't look for villains in the shadows. Look for the men with statues in the town square. Look for the revered magistrate, Lucius, a man whose public speeches on Roman virtue were a masterclass in hypocrisy. By day, he was a pillar of the law. By night, he was a consumer of human souls, a connoisseur of terror, hiding his face not out of shame, but to preserve his market value. These weren't flawed men. They were predators who had built the perfect habitat. They were the parasites who had engineered the host to celebrate its own infestation. Understand the rot that hollowed these men out from the inside. This wasn't about sexual release. It was a desperate, pathetic addiction to the feeling of absolute control. In the forum, they were bound by laws, by tradition, by the judgment of their peers. But in the suffocating confines of the brothel, they were gods. Every whimper they elicited, every tear they caused, was a prayer affirming their omnipotence. Their cruelty was a drug, a frantic attempt to fill the void where a soul was supposed to be. They stood in their pristine white togas, projecting an aura of stoic calm, while inside, a rabid jackal was clawing at the cage, desperate for the one place it could exercise total, unquestioned dominion over another living thing. This was their true religion. Meet the esteemed merchant, whose ships brought not just grain and olive oil, but a steady, inexhaustible supply of human cattle. Ripped from their homelands and stripped of their names, their families, their very humanity. They weren't people anymore. They were things. An object, legally indistinct from a chair or a shovel, that could be used, broken, and discarded without consequence. This wasn't a moral failing. It was a legal masterpiece, a genocide of personhood, codified and enforced by the very men who profited from it. They demanded absolute purity from their wives and daughters, locking them away like treasures, while they gorged themselves on the institutionalized rape of women they had designated as subhuman. This is the central, screaming hypocrisy of Rome. They built an empire on the myth of family, honor, and piety, while its foundations rested on a bedrock of shattered families and state-sanctioned sexual violence. Every coin that crossed the pimp's palm wasn't just a payment. It was a sacrament, a reaffirmation of their divine right to own and obliterate. Their sickness wasn't a bug in the system. It was the system, working with flawless, brutal efficiency. But a monster acting alone is just a predator. What happens when the predators redesign the entire ecosystem to make themselves gods? How did they build this perfect hell? They forged a death machine and called it an economy. The fuel was an endless conveyor belt of broken bodies, a torrent of human beings captured in endless wars of expansion, their agony the price of empire. This wasn't a black market. The Lupanar was a licensed, state-regulated, tax-generating slaughterhouse. The city's elected officials, those same pious monsters, were not just its customers. They were its board of directors. The law wasn't a shield for the weak. It was the operating manual for the machine. The courts weren't a source of justice. They were the human resources department, enforcing the property rights of the owners. And don't you dare believe for a second this venom was contained to the elite. This moral poison seeped from the brothel's stone walls and into the city's bloodstream, infecting everyone. The common soldier who dragged a captive woman back to be sold, the small merchant who bought a slave for a night to feel like a big man, the craftsman who laughed at the obscene graffiti, they were all part of it. The system didn't just create victims, it created a population of numb, callous spectators who saw abject cruelty as a public utility, as unremarkable as the public baths. This is the true terror of the engine. It didn't just compartmentalize evil, it normalized it. It made inhumanity a daily spectacle, until the entire city's moral compass was shattered, leaving only the magnetic pull of power and appetite. This was the engine's genius. It was self-sustaining. War fed slavery. Slavery fed the brothels. The brothels fed the state's treasury and the elite's appetites. And religion washed the blood off everyone's hands. They drenched this entire enterprise in the blasphemous perfume of faith, erecting statues of Priapus, a grotesque god with a permanent monstrous erection, not to ward off evil, but to celebrate it. It was a public declaration. Here, brute force is our God. Penetration is our prayer. Your submission is our proof of divinity. A perfect, closed loop of predation and profit. A perpetual motion machine of human suffering. But an engine fueled by pure agony cannot run forever on the same grade of fuel. It demands more. It can only do one thing: accelerate until it tears itself apart in a final glorious explosion of depravity. This is the moment the engine exploded. The moment the mask of transaction was ripped away to reveal the true face of the enterprise: cruelty for sport. The elite of Pompeii, like all addicts, developed a tolerance. The simple, transactional brutality of the brothel no longer delivered the same jolt. They were junkies of cruelty, and they needed a stronger dose. The sickness could no longer be contained within the brothel's walls. It had to metastasize. It had to become a spectacle. The private vice had to become a public celebration. Imagine a dinner party in a sprawling villa. The finest food, the most expensive wine, and for entertainment? Not a poet or a musician, but a live performance of a snuff film from mythology. Slaves from the Lupanar, men and women, dragged into the firelight and forced to reenact the most violent, sexually debased legends for the amusement of their owners. Women forced to couple with animals. Men castrated and left to bleed to death on the floor. A theatrical performance of the myth of Attis. This was the point of no return. The depravity was no longer a secret shame. It was a status symbol. It was performance art. This was a declaration of war on the very concept of humanity. By turning suffering into a spectacle, they were not just dehumanizing their victims. They were inoculating themselves against empathy. They were training their own souls to find pleasure in the agony of others, to applaud the desecration of the human form. This was the final, irreversible step. The moment an entire class of people made a collective decision to sever their connection to the rest of the species. They were no longer just men committing evil acts in private. They were forging a new, monstrous identity as a collective, bonded together by their shared atrocities. They were burning the final bridge back to the world of human feeling. This was the moment evil stopped pretending it was anything else. It was the ultimate expression of power. Not just the right to use a body, but the right to transform its suffering into a source of entertainment for your dinner guests. The line between the brothel and the arena, between the bed and the sacrificial altar, was erased forever. They had weaponized cruelty. They had perfected the art of breaking human beings for sport, turning agony into applause. But this was just target practice. The real performance, their magnum opus of abomination, was yet to come. The doors of the Lupanar are bolted shut. A senator, a living god in a white toga, has booked the entire facility. This is not a party. This is a vivisection of the human soul, and he is the lead surgeon. The air hangs thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket of spilled wine and raw fear. He and his cronies are not here for sex. They are here to play a game. The game pieces are the bodies of the slaves. The dice are the spintria, bronze tokens stamped with acts of unspeakable degradation. A toss of the coin determines which new horror will be inflicted, which new boundary of human endurance will be systematically shattered. This is not a chaotic, drunken orgy. It is a laboratory. Look closer. See the cold, sober calculation in their eyes. They are not frenzied beasts losing control. They are scientists of suffering, meticulously documenting the breaking points of the human spirit. They are observing, taking notes, judging the quality of a scream, the authenticity of a tear. For them, this is the ultimate intellectual pursuit, to understand the mechanics of terror by being its sole architect. This cold, detached curiosity is infinitely more monstrous than any passionate rage. It is the sterile, white-gloved hand of a torturer who feels nothing but a professional interest in his subject's agony. This is the crescendo, the high temple of Roman power in its truest form. This isn't about passion or lust. It is a cold, clinical, and methodical deconstruction of a human being. A young woman is forced to perform for a dozen men while being made to sing a hymn to the goddess of chastity. The sound of their laughter is the only applause. A captured warrior, a man who once led armies, is forced to serve them wine on his hands and knees. Each sip he pours another nail in the coffin of his identity. Their goal is not release. Their goal is erasure. To prove their own divinity by demonstrating their absolute power to unmake a person, to reduce a mind, a soul, a history, to a shivering, whimpering piece of meat. And then, when they are done, when the last drop of sport has been wrung from their victims, there is silence. The deafening, profound silence after a massacre. In that void, in the vacuum left by the screams, the true monster is born. Not the men, who were just jackals feasting on a carcass. The true monster is the lie, the colossal, history-altering lie they will build to hide the bodies, to scrub the blood from the stone, and to pretend none of this ever happened. There was no justice. There was only geology. When Vesuvius erupted, it was not the wrath of a god. It was a random, geological spasm, a cosmic accident that was utterly indifferent to the crimes buried beneath it. It did not punish the wicked. It simply sealed the crime scene. In the supreme and final irony, the force that annihilated Pompeii also immortalized it. Vesuvius wasn't their executioner. It was their damned photographer, capturing their abomination in a perfect, eternal snapshot. The fire didn't cleanse their sins. It fired them in a kiln for all of history to witness. The reckoning never came. Their victims received no justice. Their tormentors faced no judgment. There was only a blanket of ash. And when we finally brushed it away, centuries later, what did we do? We turned their torture chamber into a tourist trap. We put up velvet ropes. We sell postcards of their murder weapons. We have become the willing curators of their crime scene, gawking at the evidence without ever naming the crime. We did exactly what the monsters would have wanted. We remembered their architecture and forgot their atrocities. Do not be mistaken. Their empire of filth did not crumble. It was merely buried. And its legacy, its blueprint for power, is the poison that has been seeping into the soil of civilization ever since. The idea that some people are not people. The idea that power grants a license for depravity. The idea that systems of exploitation can be justified as economics and culture. That engine of corruption was never scrapped for parts. It was just given a new coat of paint. It's still running. It's all around you. And if you think for 1 second that we are better than them, you haven't been paying attention.